Survivors of an explosion at a military base in Valcartier, Quebec have been waiting for this day. The military ombudsman released his findings into the 1974 incident that left 6 teenage cadets dead and dozens more injured. The teenagers had been passing what they thought were dummy grenades around when one of those grenades exploded. The survivors were told not to talk about it. They were not offered financial or emotional support. But the Ombudsman says that was wrong. He recommends the Department of National Defence offer assessments and immediate financial compensation. Gerry Fostaty is one of the surviving cadets. He, in fact, wrote a book about his experience. The book is called As You Were: The Tragedy at Valcartier, and he is right here in studio now. I'm looking for your reaction, but I do want to thank you. This has probably raised a whole bunch of emotions in your heart. Let me begin with what's in there right now.
A little bit of relief, but a little bit of skepticism, trepidation of what this really means. I haven't read the whole report yet, but I was briefed this morning by the Ombudsman and a group this morning. And when I say brief, it was brief. They only went through a few points. We're still waiting on the government to make an announcement. They said that shortly after the Ombudsman made his announcement, that there would be an announcement from the minister, and then shortly after that, one from the Department of National Defence as well. So we're waiting for that. And
we're watching as well. We'll certainly be bringing that information to you and to our viewers. What was that conversation like with the Ombudsman? Because I'm sure you went through, as you say, it was brief, but the main points: assessment, financial compensation.
It was so long in coming that we really had no idea what to wish for, hope for. We wanted specific things out of it. We wanted an apology. We wanted acknowledgement that the event actually occurred. It has gone into the realm of urban legend within the forces and within the public as well. And we want support for the boys who are, well, they're not boys anymore, but for those who were injured both physically and emotionally during this event, and subsequently because of the treatment that they had post-event. The actual explosion itself is one thing, but the fact that we had no debrief afterwards, there was no counseling, there was no comfort offered. They were sent back to their home units and their homes with nothing more than please keep quiet about this, and that was it.
What was the trauma?
That explosion, I mean, you have to remember there were 138 boys sitting in a very small room being given a lecture. Explosives were passed around.
Grenades being passed around.
Yes, and they were supposed to be dummies, and one was not, one was live. Several times during the seminar, cadets asked, is this live? Is this safe to play with? And they were given the reaction, yes, it's fine, it's perfectly safe. And so one of them pulled the pin, and it detonated and killed him and 5 of his friends and injured 54 others seriously. And although there were 90 people who presented at emergency that day. So these boys were sitting in a room just after the explosion, after the flash, and they were covered in their friends' blood and body parts. It was very, very difficult.
You know, I'm listening to you, I have goosebumps. I'm trying to imagine it, and I can't. And then you come along.
Well, and I was walking into the room at the time, so it then became my job, along with a few others, to get those boys out of that room, and that was extremely difficult. And these were boys we were very familiar with, as you can imagine. 40
years later, we're talking about it, but you wrote a book about it. What was it that made you decide this is time?
I hadn't spoken of it to my family, not my parents, not my sisters.
How do you carry that with you without even talking about it?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I spoke briefly to my wife about it, but I thought the only way to actually let them know would be to write it in a book. Just write it down and then pass it to them, and then they would be able to open a dialogue. And that's really why I wrote the book initially.
Now, survivors were instructed not to speak to anybody. You were instructed, and all of you, this did not happen. So how can that be fixed now? After all these decades, how do you even begin to fix it?
I don't know. This is never, I have no experience with this, so I really don't know how you fix it. But it's been 40 years, and many of these guys have not said a word to their families about it. So this is starting to open up a dialogue with their families as well. I don't know how you fix it.
You know, people carry secrets, right? hard to imagine a bigger secret than sitting in a room where an explosion happens and your friends are on you. So what will you be watching for then in the days and the weeks, perhaps even in the hours ahead, Gerry?
I'm going to listen very carefully for the Minister of Defence's reaction to this, and I want to hear how quickly they will implement the recommendations. The Minister said last week sometime that he would implement all of the recommendations. And I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see it happen relatively quickly because it's been 41 years. It's been a long time. And see to what degree, or if there is a degree, where they will pull back from that. Our concern is that there's an election coming, and perhaps post-election, this will be forgotten. I'm hoping that won't be the case.
We'll be watching as well. Once again, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you in studio and for you to share the story.
Thank you very much.
Gerry Fostaty, one of the cadets who survived the explosion at the military base in Valcartier, Quebec. This was 1974. I am going to be speaking with the Canadian Military Ombudsman, Gary Wellborn. That's coming up, and it's about today's report that Gerry and I were talking about. That interview, by the way, will happen in an hour's time right here on CBC News Network. Thank you.